One rock legend wrote a song so personal that he eventually stopped performing it altogether. Another recorded a whisper into a microphone, and years later, fans would hear it as a goodbye. One of the greatest songs ever written still carries a secret that died with the man who created it. And one rock icon released an anthem that, less than a year later, would be viewed in a completely different light. Rock legends don't just create music. They pour grief, survival, prophecy, and confession into sound. And then they hand it to the world. Most listeners never dig past the melody, but the real story is always underneath. For decades, millions of people have sung these lyrics without ever knowing the stories behind them. The grief, the chaos, the loneliness, the moments of triumph. These aren't just songs. They're confessions, warnings, love letters, farewells, and in some cases, the truth hiding in plain sight. Tonight we open 10 stories that were never meant to be found. 10 moments where the music told the truth before anyone was ready to hear it. This is Rock Music Archives, and the archive never sleeps. Number 10. Eric Clapton, Tears in Heaven, 1992. In the winter of 1991, Eric Clapton received the most devastating phone call of his life. His 4-year-old son, Connor, had fallen from a 53rd floor window of a New York City apartment building. He was gone instantly. Clapton, the man the streets of London had literally called God, the guitarist who had survived addiction, heartbreak, and personal collapse across 3 decades in rock and roll, had never felt anything like this. The grief was total, absolute, suffocating. But Clapton did what musicians do in the darkest moments. He wrote. Together with songwriter Will Jennings, Clapton channeled the unimaginable into music. The result was Tears in Heaven, a song so intimate, so raw, that even decades later it still hits like a wound that never fully healed. The song was first recorded for the 1991 film Rush, where it quietly found its earliest audience. But when it was officially released in 1992, the world stopped. It won 3 Grammy Awards, including Record of the Year and Song of the Year in 1993. It reached number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100. Critics called it one of the most emotionally honest songs ever recorded. But success meant nothing to Clapton. He later said in interviews that performing the song had become increasingly painful. Every live performance was a reopening of the wound. Every note was his son's name written in sound. In 2004, Clapton made a quiet but profound decision. He stopped performing Tears in Heaven live. He said he had moved through his grief, that the song no longer represented where he was emotionally. He didn't want to revisit that darkness every night just to give an audience what they expected. To this day, live performances of that song are rare, sacred, almost ghostly, because Tears in Heaven was never about art. It was a father's letter to a son he would never see again. Number 9. Steven Tyler, Dream On, 1973. Before the arena tours, before the supermodel girlfriends and the MTV specials, before the addiction spirals and the miraculous comebacks, there was a teenager sitting alone at a piano. His name was Steven Tallarico. The world would later know him as Steven Tyler, and at just 17 or 18 years old, he began writing a song. Not about drugs, not about women, not about rock and roll, but about time, about fear, about what it feels like to reach for a dream and wonder if it will ever arrive. That song was Dream On. Sing with me, sing for me. Released in 1973 on Aerosmith's debut album, it was initially overlooked. The record didn't chart significantly. Critics were lukewarm. Radio was indifferent. The band was just another Boston group fighting for scraps. But something strange happened over the next few years. The song kept growing. Word of mouth, late-night radio plays, fans who felt it somewhere deep in their chest, somewhere they couldn't quite explain. By 1976, when it was re-released as a single, Dream On broke into the top 15 on the Billboard Hot 100. Aerosmith was no longer just a club band. They were on their way to becoming one of the greatest rock acts in American history. But the deeper story has nothing to do with chart positions. Steven Tyler has described Dream On as one of the most personal things he ever created. The lyrics, about looking in the mirror and watching the lines of age appear, hit differently when you know what came next. Because Tyler would spend the next 2 decades fighting demons that nearly destroyed him. Addiction, personal chaos, band breakups that felt permanent, near-death experiences, stints in rehabilitation, years when the dream looked like it had finally run out. And yet he survived. Every single time. The song, written by a hopeful teenager, became the anthem of a survivor. Because sometimes the most prophetic songs are written before you even know what you're about to survive.
Number 8. David Bowie, Space Oddity, 1969. July 1969. The world was watching the sky. Neil Armstrong was preparing to walk on the moon, and the BBC chose a brand new song to accompany their broadcast coverage of that historic moment. It was called Space Oddity, and its author was a 22-year-old David Bowie. On the surface, the song told the story of Major Tom, an astronaut floating away from Earth into the silence of space. A melancholy science fiction narrative set to acoustic guitar, orchestration, and an almost dreamlike arrangement. But beneath the stars and the capsule, something else was buried. Bowie was writing during a period of profound personal turbulence. He had watched his close friend and creative influence, Syd Barrett of Pink Floyd, spiral into severe mental illness and effectively vanish from the world. The image of a man floating away, cut off from mission control, unable to return to the life he knew, was not entirely fictional. Space Oddity became Bowie's first top 5 hit in the United Kingdom. It launched a career that would span 5 decades and permanently alter the landscape of popular music. But Bowie himself had a complicated relationship with the song. He revisited Major Tom throughout his career, notably in Ashes to Ashes in 1980, where he revealed, with devastating bluntness, that Major Tom was a junkie. I'm stepping through the door. It was a direct reflection of Bowie's own well-documented struggles with cocaine during the mid-1970s, years during which he later admitted he remembered very little. The astronaut who drifted through space was always Bowie himself, alone, brilliant, untethered, finding beauty in the silence between the stars. Number 7. Bon Scott, Highway to Hell, 1979. In 1979, AC/DC released what would become one of the greatest rock anthems ever recorded. Highway to Hell, a thundering declaration of hard living, relentless touring, and an absolute refusal to slow down, to apologize, to be anything other than exactly what they were. Lead singer Bon Scott delivered the lyrics with that wild grin and whiskey-soaked voice, like a man who genuinely had nothing to lose, because, in many ways, he didn't. The song was written as a direct, unapologetic reflection of the band's life on the road, the endless travel, the cheap hotels, the grueling schedule that would grind most musicians into dust. Bon Scott and the Young brothers, Angus and Malcolm, were survivors of the rock and roll machine, and they wore that survival like armor. The Highway to Hell album became their mainstream breakthrough, their first to crack the American Top 40. After years of grinding through clubs and arenas in Australia and Europe, AC/DC had finally arrived. But the celebration would be devastatingly short. On February 19, 1980, less than a year after the album's release, Bon Scott was found dead in a friend's car in London. He was 33 years old. The official cause of death was listed as acute alcohol poisoning. The rock world was stunned. Fans were heartbroken. And suddenly, the song that had been a battle cry for the open road became something else entirely. Highway to Hell was never meant to be a prophecy. It was never meant to be a farewell. It was a celebration of survival, written by a man who had no idea his highway was already ending. But history has a way of rewriting the stories of those who leave too soon. Bon Scott never made it to the other side of his highway, but the music he left behind has never stopped driving. Number 6. John Lennon, Imagine, 1971.
No hell below us.
Imagine a world without borders, without war, without the walls that divide us. That was the dream John Lennon offered the world in 1971, and it became one of the most recognized songs ever written.
Imagine all the people.
But the world in which Imagine was created was anything but peaceful. Lennon and Yoko Ono had relocated to New York City, where they became targets of a sustained surveillance effort by the Nixon administration. The U.S. government viewed Lennon's highly public anti-war activism as a direct political threat and attempted for years to have him deported from the United States. The FBI maintained an active file on Lennon. Agents monitored his activities. There were serious, documented efforts to silence one of the world's most beloved artists simply for speaking his mind. And yet, in the middle of all that fear and institutional pressure, Lennon sat down and wrote the most optimistic song of his generation.
You may say I'm a dreamer.
Imagine drew conceptual inspiration in part from Yoko Ono's 1964 book, Grapefruit, a collection of minimalist, instruction-based artworks. Lennon himself acknowledged in later interviews that the song reflected her ideas significantly, though Ono did not receive an official co-writing credit until decades after his death. The song became an immediate global anthem. It reached number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100. It topped charts across the world. It has been covered, sung at protests, played at funerals, and broadcast into space.
And the world will live as one.
But there is a painful irony at the very heart of Imagine. The man who dreamed of a world without violence was shot and killed outside his own apartment building on December 8, 1980. He was 40 years old. And in the silence that followed that gunshot, as the news spread across the world in real time, Imagine took on a weight it was never designed to carry. It was not just a song. It was a warning, a wish, a farewell dressed in melody. Number 5. Jim Morrison. Light My Fire, 1967. In 1967, a 23-year-old poet stepped up to a microphone and changed rock and roll forever. His name was Jim Morrison, and the song was Light My Fire. Originally written by guitarist Robbie Krieger, the song began as a relatively simple blues-influenced composition. But when Morrison added his voice, that deep, hypnotic, theatrical baritone, and the band extended it into a nearly 7-minute piece of psychedelic rock, something entirely different emerged.
Come on, baby, light my fire.
Light My Fire reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in July 1967. It stayed there for 3 weeks. The Doors were no longer underground. They were everywhere. And for Jim Morrison, that spotlight came with a weight he was never quite prepared to carry. Morrison was a poet who had stumbled into rock stardom. He saw the Doors as a vehicle for art and confrontation, not commerce. As Light My Fire turns the band into a commercial phenomenon, Morrison's behavior became increasingly unpredictable. The 1967 incident during a planned Ed Sullivan Show appearance, where the band allegedly defied producers' requests to alter a lyric, became one of the defining stories of Morrison's rebellious public persona. Reports have varied over the years, but the narrative cemented an image that Morrison seemed almost unable or unwilling to escape.
Come on, baby, light my fire.
His onstage behavior grew more chaotic. His drinking intensified. His relationship with his own fame became a slow-burning conflict between the poet he wanted to be and the icon the world had decided he was. Light My Fire had opened a door that Morrison was never entirely sure he wanted to walk through. On July 3, 1971, just 4 years after the song reached number 1, Jim Morrison was found dead in a Paris apartment. He was 27 years old. The door he lit on fire eventually consumed him. Number 4. Freddie Mercury, Bohemian Rhapsody, 1975. In 1975, Freddie Mercury walked into the recording studio with a song unlike anything the world had ever heard. No chorus, no conventional structure. 6 minutes of operatic rock that shifted in tone, key, and dimension multiple times within a single track. A composition that defied every rule radio existed by. His bandmates were bewildered. His record label was deeply skeptical. Radio programmers across the industry said it was unplayable. Too long, too strange, too risky, too everything. Freddie Mercury did not care. Bohemian Rhapsody was released in October 1975 and immediately shot to number 1 in the United Kingdom, where it stayed for 9 consecutive weeks. At the time, that was a record. The iconic performance on Top of the Pops, accompanied by the band's groundbreaking promotional video, one of the earliest music videos of its kind, is now considered a pivotal moment in the history of popular music. But the song's greatest mystery has never been solved. What does it actually mean? Freddie Mercury was famously, almost defiantly, protective of the song's personal meaning. He told interviewers it was about real-life situations expressed in a poetic way. Beyond that, he refused, consistently and completely, to elaborate. Over the decades, fans and critics have proposed countless interpretations. Some see a narrative of guilt and confession. Others identify themes of identity and internal conflict. Many have suggested that the song may reflect something of Mercury's own complex private life, the layers of a man who lived one of rock's most public existences while guarding his deepest truths with extraordinary care.
Put a gun against his head.
Mercury was a deeply private person behind the glittering costumes and theatrical performances. He carried truths the world would only begin to understand after his death. On November 24, 1991, Freddie Mercury died from bronchopneumonia brought on by AIDS. He was 45 years old. He had only publicly acknowledged his diagnosis the day before he died. Bohemian Rhapsody was re-released after his death. It reached number 1 again. The mystery he left inside that song remains unsolved to this day. And perhaps that was exactly how he wanted it. Number 3. Axel Rose. Sweet Child O' Mine, 1987. In 1987, among the chaos, the danger, and the barely contained energy of Guns N' Roses, came a love song. Guitarist Slash had written the riff almost accidentally, as a circular picking exercise, something he was playing around with during rehearsal. A warm-up pattern he had no particular intention of using for anything serious. When he played it, bassist Duff McKagan and drummer Steven Adler locked in almost immediately. Something about it felt undeniable. Axel Rose disappeared and returned with lyrics he had already written in a private journal, a poem composed for his then-girlfriend Erin Everly, daughter of Don Everly of the legendary Everly Brothers. The song was vulnerable, tender, nostalgic, completely and deliberately at odds with everything Guns N' Roses was supposed to represent on the surface. But that contrast was exactly what made it devastating. Sweet Child O' Mine became the band's first and only #1 single on the Billboard Hot 100. It was the defining commercial peak of the Appetite for Destruction era, one of the best-selling debut albums in the entire history of rock music. And yet, behind that beautiful song, the band was already quietly, then not so quietly, tearing itself apart. Substance abuse was rampant throughout the band. Interpersonal tensions were volcanic and worsening. The same raw energy and reckless excess that gave Guns N' Roses their electricity was, at the same time, the thing slowly destroying their foundation. Axel Rose's personal relationship with Erin Everly, the woman the song was written about, would later become deeply troubled, and the two separated after a brief marriage. The sweetness in that song was real. The feeling was genuine. But it existed inside a world that was anything but. Sometimes the most honest moments of beauty come from the most broken places. Number 2. Ozzy Osbourne. Crazy Train, 1980. In 1980, Ozzy Osbourne had just been fired from Black Sabbath, the band he had helped build into one of the most powerful and influential acts in rock history. He was at rock bottom, struggling to find direction, genuinely uncertain whether his career had ended before he was ready to let it go. And then he met a guitarist named Randy Rhoads. Together, they created something extraordinary. Crazy Train, the opening track from Osbourne's debut solo album Blizzard of Oz, was a declaration to the entire industry. Ozzy Osbourne was not finished.
I know that things are going wrong for me.
The song opened with one of the most iconic guitar introductions in rock history. Rhoads' multi-tracked classical acoustic figure leading into a thundering, precise electric assault that showcased a level of technical and musical mastery that stopped listeners in their tracks. Lyrically, Crazy Train reflected themes of mental instability, social fear, and the sensation of a world spinning entirely out of control. Given Osbourne's very public battles with substance abuse and his notoriously chaotic public image, the song felt intensely and personally resonant, even if it wasn't written as direct autobiography. The album launched Osbourne as a serious solo force. Rhoads was celebrated as one of the most gifted guitarists of his generation. The future looked genuinely, impossibly bright.
I know that things are going wrong for me.
But the story behind Crazy Train carries its own quiet, unbearable tragedy. On March 19, 1982, less than 2 years after the song's release, Randy Rhoads was killed in a small aircraft accident during a tour stop in Leesburg, Florida. He was 25 years old. Rhoads' death devastated Osbourne. He has spoken in numerous interviews across the following decades about how he has never fully recovered from the loss of his friend and musical partner.
I'm going off the rails on a crazy train.
The song that launched Ozzy's solo career became a permanent monument to a genius taken far too soon. Crazy Train still opens Osbourne's concerts to this day, every single note, a tribute to the young guitarist who helped save his life. Number 1. Kurt Cobain. Something in the Way, 1991. The album closer that most casual listeners never quite reached. Something in the Way was not supposed to be the song that defined a generation's relationship with loneliness, but it became exactly that. Kurt Cobain recorded the song in an almost impossibly intimate way. According to producer Butch Vig, Cobain sat alone in the studio's control room and whispered the vocal directly into a microphone, so quietly that the entire building seemed to hold its breath. Everyone in that studio went still. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Even those who had worked with countless artists over years in the industry recognized they were witnessing something that could not be manufactured. The lyrics described a figure living beneath a bridge, cold, isolated, surviving on whatever the margins allowed, existing at the very edge of visibility. Cobain said the song drew partly from feelings of isolation and displacement he had experienced following his parents' divorce as a child. Stories later emerged about him sleeping in difficult circumstances around Aberdeen, Washington, including near the Yonge Street Bridge over the Wishkah River. Whether those stories were entirely literal has been debated. Cobain's own accounts shifted over time, and he was known to mythologize elements of his past. But the emotional truth of that isolation, the feeling of being unseen, untethered, forgotten, was never in question. Cobain had felt invisible long before Nirvana made him impossible to ignore. Something in the Way was the side of Nevermind that did not want to be famous. It was the silence after the noise, the stillness beneath the screaming, the song that said everything the rest of the album was too loud to say. And when Kurt Cobain died on April 5, 1994, Something in the Way became something the world had not prepared for. Not just a song about a young man beneath a bridge, but a quiet, final portrait of someone who never found solid ground. The whisper at the end of the record turned out to be a goodbye. 10 songs, 10 stories, 10 moments where the music told the truth before anyone was ready to hear it. Rock and roll has always been more than sound. It has been confession, prophecy, grief, survival, defiance. A letter from someone who couldn't find any other way to say what needed to be said. And in the places where legend meets loss, where the private becomes the permanent, that is where the real history lives. Here at Rock Music Archives, we keep digging, we keep listening, we keep uncovering the stories the mainstream forgot to tell. The stories that deserve to be heard not just once, but again and again, because they were never finished. If these stories moved you, if even one of them landed somewhere you didn't expect, subscribe, leave a comment, tell us which story hit hardest, because the archive is just getting started. This is Rock Music Archives, and the archive never sleeps.